And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and I am joined by my story co pilot, Sam G., as we tackled this Preptober event, the lead up to NaNoWriMo. And it's been a lot of fun so far. Sam, thank you for joining me and for being my brainstorm partner and we've had a lot of fun, and this is
Yeah,
something we should definitely continue in the future. So thank you for joining me and being part of the fun and shenanigans.
yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Uh, yeah, it has. We were just talking, for those that are joining us, we were just talking a minute ago about NaNoWriMo coming up, and that's kind of the catalyst for this discussion of the Preptober. Is we're getting ready for NaNoWriMo coming up, and I got to thinking, before this morning, as to kind of what exactly we were going to do on the show and stuff. And I started thinking about, we've had a brainstorming session and come up with some pretty good story ideas, I feel like. And then last week we went over the plot grid and how do we start translating some of those story ideas into a plot that we could see on the grid. And today I thought we would talk about some more aspects to getting ready for NaNoWriMo. And I found several articles online that we'll kind of reference, and because I thought they were good information about things that you need to kind of check off your list and preparing for NaNoWriMo. And one of them from the Reedsy blog, they had a list, and one was define your story pitch. And I feel like we kind of did that in week one, where we kind of came up with some kind of high level ideas, and then kind of narrowed them down and kind of shrunk them into the beginnings of our story. So that was that was the first part, and then number two was know your protagonist, and we've gotten to know our protagonist, and then our side characters or tertiary characters, and we've come up with an antagonist, and kind of worked through what the antagonist motivation is. And so we've done some character work. That's important. Identify the key plot points, and we have done some of that. We've got the kind of what gets the story started and some kind of high level, but we could still work on continuing out those plot points, and we're going to look at some ways today that you could do that. Number four, choose a practical POV or point of view. And I also made a list of topics, and point of view was one of them. So I thought this would be a fun place to kind of pause and talk about character point of view. Sam, a lot of times a writer will have a point of view that they're very comfortable in, or well, this has more to do with the next point that we'll get into in just a second. But point of view, who are you? Whose eyes are you telling the story through? Whose voice is telling the story? Are we going to have a single character point of view? Some people like to tell a story from multiple points of view. So this is especially handy in, for instance, and not just this, but for instance, a mystery thriller, especially if you have an unreliable narrator. It's fun to tell a story from this one narrator's perspective, and then you have a second narrator that comes in and maybe writes another chapter, and they contradict everything that the first one said. And you then, as the reader, you're like, well, who do I believe? Well, that's part of the fun. Who do you believe? And, and many a thriller mystery, comes out of that. Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn,
Yeah,
kind of cracked the code on that. And there have been so many, I don't want to say Gone Girl knockoffs, because there've been some very good stories that use that mechanic, but it's been done before. But they find new ways to do it. So, do you like to tell a story from a single point of view? Do you like multiple points of view? And do you see any benefit or drawback to going from one to the other?
Um, I enjoy writing multiple points of view. I have, in the book I just finished, I have my main character's point of view, and then I
Yeah.
have two or three different other characters' points of view who know different things than the main character does.
Right.
And so the reader knows things before the main character does, and it kind of develops over time from there.
That is another. I'm glad you brought that up because not only can you misdirect the reader by an unreliable narrator and then a an opposite or a foil to that, but also you can tell things that the narrator doesn't know yet, and that's a lot of fun because then it's fun to sit in the seat as a reader and know that you know more than the main narrator, and that can build anxiety when you see things coming that they don't see, and that's a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
And you write mostly science fiction and fantasy. So do you like have a cast of narrators that are close together? Is it, big world changing events where, a person doesn't see a cataclysm coming or it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but is like, how do you normally use the multiple narrators?
I will have, in this last book, I had all of my points of view from, they're all very close together. They live on the same ship for the most part, or in the same apartment even. In the sequel to that I'm planning on, however, I will have one point of view from the good guys and another point of view from the villain's perspective.
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That is a lot of fun. We had a comment from Black Blade. I love sorry, I'm tripping over a cough drop. I love first person point of view for reading, but I find to prefer writing in third person point of view. This is a great comment because first person, you are living the story through your narrator's perspective, through their eyes, and you're hearing it through their voice. But a third person can be, you've got third person omniscient, which is, kind of someone sitting in the God seat. They're completely removed from the situation, but able to see the lay of the land. And then you've got first person close, where the narrator's almost sitting on the main character's shoulder. They're you're seeing it not through the character's eyes, but someone very close to them, and they're describing what's going on around the character, but they can't really see very far away from the character. They're very close. So that's fun as well, kind of playing with removing yourself from the character, and you're able to accomplish a lot of what you're talking about, Sam, by having the perspective of different characters, but from even another character that's not part of the story and the narrator, and that is a fun thing to play with because you don't have to exactly explain who's doing the narrating. They're just kind of removed from it, and that's fun to play with as well.
It is. It is.
So we've got first person or third person. Do you like first person versus third or third versus first?
I will normally write third person limited, so it's kind of like first person, but I don't use the I and you and everything else.
Right. But do you still take the view that that you can't see everything? You're still very close to that character. Is that how you approach it?
For the most part, yeah.
Do you ever include things that the main character can't see, but is still close to them?
Yes. I have if he were paying attention, for example, he would have seen this, or he didn't notice them doing whatever it
Right,
is over here.
right, right. That's a good use. And then we have to talk about second person, which I personally have never seen done well. I'm sure there's going to be someone's going to write a comment, on YouTube, that this is my favorite book and it's written in second person and you don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure there's something out there. I just personally haven't read it. But second person would be like you walk to the door, you turn the knob, you walk into the room, and it puts you in the character's head, and it's it's jarring, or can be,
Yeah.
and I've never tried it because I think I would write a paragraph and like this just feels clunky and it just doesn't, it feels like a jacket that's too small. It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it does. The only books that come to mind who have ever done well
Yeah.
are the choose your own adventure books.
Yes. Yes. And
Other
that's kind of
than
a thing
that, I
all its
haven't
own.
really.
Yeah. Um, I remember in the early days of home computers, back in the 80s,
Oh yeah.
when text adventure games, Zork was a huge one. The early King's Quest games, even though they had graphics, they were still graphics and it was mostly text. And they would take that approach, the approach of the choose your own adventure. You approach a castle and there's a guard guarding the moat. What do you do now? And it's,
Yeah.
and
I always had difficulty with them because they're all timed,
right.
and I had to read all of the choices and actually think about it, and then I ran out of time, so I always chose the wrong one.
Those are fun. You can find a lot of those games online now. I think it's a fun exercise for writers that have writer's block and can't figure out what to do. Playing with a story like that sometimes will trigger, knock something loose and give you some ideas. So
Oh
go
yeah.
find them and experiment with them. Um, very close to point of view. And another thing that's well, first off, the point of view, you kind of need to nail that down early on in the writing, because as with the next thing we're going to talk about, there's nothing worse than getting halfway through your novel and thinking, I really want to do it this way, and then having to go back and edit and change all that is
Yep.
is terrible. So figure out what you like. Maybe write a page or two and just try it out. See how it feels. Does this feel like a character that I can speak through their voice? And if so, if that voice comes naturally to you, try first person. Write a couple pages. See what it feels like. If you want to take, I don't want to say disinterested, but a separate party, and explain and maybe include some detail that your main character can't see. Try third person, write a couple of pages, see how it feels, see if you like that voice. Blackblade said, do see Bright Lights Big City by Jay McInerney. I'm sure I murdered that name. The only book I've read that did second person well. I will look that up, Jay. Or I'm sorry, Blackblade by Jay McInerney. I will look that up for sure. Thank you for that recommendation. So close to point of view, the other thing that we need to nail down early on is the tense of the book. Um, is your narration happening in real time, which would be present tense, or is it happening in the past tense? Um, I I would think that for a long time, past tense was kind of the default, the go to. Um, you know, uh, Joe walked up to the castle, and it was a sunny day, and and it feels very natural to tell a story that way. Then there's also the present tense, and that can be very immediate. And I actually did an experiment a few years ago, and I wrote a whole book in present tense, and it was the book called Writer's Block, and it was an exercise in kind of telling a story in this immediate present tense, and it was a lot of fun. But as anyone who's tried to do it has probably realized, I would be in the middle of writing a chapter, and I'm writing present tense, and then somewhere along the way I switched to past tense and didn't even realize it until doing an editing pass, and I'm like, whoa, that's jarring. It's I wake up, I walk to the closet and pull on my coat, I walk to the kitchen and make a pot of coffee, to then I drank the pot of coffee, and I sat at the table for 30 minutes. Well, all of a sudden I just switched gears and didn't even realize it. So they can definitely accomplish different things, but make sure you're being consistent. How do you feel about the tense of your story, Sam?
I can imagine it would be difficult writing in present tense. I haven't tried it personally.
Yeah.
I normally write in past tense. I can see how present tense would work with, again, the second person or first person.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about third person, but then I haven't tried it.
Yeah, that story I wrote was first person present tense, and it definitely felt clunky in the beginning, but then I kind of I fell into it, and I found myself thinking like the character. What would I do here, and how would I respond to this? And it was a great exercise, if for nothing else than just getting to get this intimate feeling with your character that only comes from very narrow point of view, and kind of dynamic as it's happening. So it was a very interesting. I don't know that I would ever do it again, but it was a very interesting exercise. It was a lot of fun. When it was over, the editing was terrible because 'cause I had to go back and correct myself over and over again. It was terrible, but it was a good exercise in paying attention to what you're doing, especially. Yeah. Do you think there are certain genres that do one or the other better than I've heard that YA is very much a likes first person present tense more than, say, a mystery thriller that is past tense third person, and a lot of thrillers are like Gone Girl, first person is really making a big splash there. So do you see that something uses one or the other more effectively?
Yeah, actually, I have noticed that. Romance, for example, you can't really do the whole present tense kind of thing
Yeah,
well. Um,
true,
Sci-fi, you could do present tense if you don't give too much away. Um,
true.
Young adult, I've definitely seen more first person present tense recently. I want to say with some of the more Disney villains books, that series in particular, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I'm sure I am.
um Science fiction and fantasy things with a big world and a big story scope, I think are very well suited to third person past tense, especially where you can kind of step back and take in the scope of the especially epic fantasy. That lends very well. That there's something about having a big world and a large scope, but then tying yourself down to a single character's point of view. It almost feels constraining or something. You want to be able to take in the vastness of the world, for lack
Mhm.
of a better, um, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
especially if it's written not on Earth. You want to know, okay, well,
exactly.
what does this world look like?
Right, right, and that's one of the big draws for epic fantasy, especially is, or for science fiction, otherworldly science fiction, is the world building. We love description, and and you can't take in all that if you're, you know, tying yourself down. Black Blade says present tense is definitely becoming more common in both first and third person point of view. I actually think as a reader, you soon forget what tense it's written in, and the story takes over. That's a great um, point. If done well, you will kind of forget the shackles of the constraints of the story and just kind of become part of it. Um, that's another thing that's going to come with practice and inhabiting that world.
The beauty of reading.
Exactly. Exactly. The next thing in our list was nail the place of your story. So defining your place, your world building. Um, when because you write science fiction and fantasy, how important to you, Sam, is the world building? We talk about fantasy writers that will, Robert Jordan. We'll use him as an example. The Wheel of Time. He would go 3 pages describing the buttons on someone's jacket, or
Yeah.
dress. So
Yeah.
the man loved his world building. How do you start thinking about building a secondary world, or a world that's not, what we're experiencing on Earth?
I love world building personally. It's one of my favorite things. I have pages and pages of notes in Dabble of just world building, um, and it's a lot of it won't make it into the books, unfortunately, because I realize that not everyone wants 3 pages of describing a tree.
Well, that's a great point. Sometimes the world building is for you as the writer. That some things you just need to settle in your mind. Um, that then you can write a scene that you don't necessarily use all that description, but what you're writing is informed by that description and all that information that you came up with. So while you're not telling all of that to the reader, it's definitely in your toolbox, and it's informing what you're doing. So while not necessarily making it to the page, it might be an integral part of what the reader does see in an indirect way. And I know I said a lot to to say that you don't always use it on the page, but it's part of your education as a writer. Um, anyway, yeah. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, it definitely is. I use some of my notes in my writing, but definitely have the background information for almost every place that's in my book.
Yeah, yeah. There's, and within world building, we think about just the lay of the land, so to speak, but that really encompasses a lot. Let me pull my notes up here. World building could include the setting, and in the setting we're talking about people, the races, the morals of these people. What do they consider, um, you know what is good and what is bad, the way that classes are defined in a society. What is high class, what is low class, what does all that involve? And even if you're talking about the modern Western society of the United States or Canada or Great Britain, you think that we live in a classless society, yet people invariably group themselves or get grouped by others, depending on the job that you have or, um, any number of things can separate people, and those things are things that are fun to play with. The economy, how does money work in your world?
Exactly.
Is it paper money like we have? Is it a lot of futuristic sci-fi? We'll use credits as so how does your economy work? How does healthcare work? That's a fun thing to explore. And um, what's the technology like? Are we talking about an epic fantasy where magic is the technology? That's where you don't have any modern conveniences like electricity or combustion engine automobiles, but you have lanterns that are powered by magic. And so why would you need electricity? Like, and what how does the magic system affect the evolution of technology? That's a fun thing to play with and to think about, and that all goes into world building. Agriculture, are we talking about an agrarian society like a lot of kind of Middle Ages based epic fantasy, deals with? What's the climate of the world like?
Exactly.
Yeah, astronomy. When your characters are laying under the night sky, what are they seeing in the sky? Are there multiple moons on this planet, or can you see other planets in your solar system? And then how does as our climate and our oceans are affected by our one moon. If you have a planet with three moons, what would that mean? That you were prone to tsunamis? I mean, I don't know. These are things that you could explore and play with. The continents, how many continents are on your world? Cities, does your story take place in a big city? Is there a big city that you could travel to? Flora, fauna, oceans, climate, etc. I mean, you could go on and on. You could go as detailed as you wanted to with your world building, and each of these things has the potential to affect how your story unfolds.
Oh yeah. And
Um,
even if you're just set on Earth, what does the apartment look like? Are they in an
exactly.
apartment? Are they in a house? Are they in a shop?
Right. Right. And what's the neighborhood like? How do the
Mhm.
people that all live close together, how do they form associations? And that you could go on and on. The next thing you should consider is the time frame of your story. Does your story exist all in one day? Does it happen over a year, where we're going from the fall of the year, like we are now, where the story begins and it resolves at the end of summer next year? There's you could have four distinct kind of sections to your book as the seasons turn, and it brings about whatever you so or does it exist in one day where everything has to blow up and resolve in a single day, and how does that play out? um you know Fun stuff to consider. um Magic systems, how does your if
Yes.
you're writing a book where um where magic plays a part, and the story we were brainstorming was a an urban fantasy where Tolkien's elves wound up in our present day real world. What kind of magic are they bringing with them? How does magic work in your world? Is it a technology based magic? Are there certain elements in the world that power things? Is this like a completely ethereal, kind of thing? Is it a magic system based on spells and learning a grimoire, and you know, how does it work? Um, so yeah, those are things to consider. And a comment here from Black Blade: which fantasy worlds do you think of as the most memorable? I think
Hmm.
I think Tolkien's Middle Earth is, for any fantasy fan, you got to love Tolkien. And our comment keeps going away. Um, Sorry about that. Tolkien's world is very memorable for me, probably because that was the fantasy story I kind of cut my teeth on. Um, One fantasy world that I absolutely love is one created by Stephen Lawhead in his Song of Albion trilogy. And it's a portal fantasy where a person from the modern present day finds a portal into the Celtic otherworld, and he kind of falls into a uh, what feels like a fantasy setting, but it's more akin to a third or fourth century AD, early Britain, and that is a lot of fun.
It
Uh,
sounds it.
Oh, it's so good, so good. It was published in the late '80s or early '90s, but it's one of my all time favorite series. Um, Trying to think, do you have a favorite fantasy series?
I do. I enjoy Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar series.
Yeah.
Her her magic system, the mind magic, the way that particularly works with the companions and everything else. I love it. How
Um,
empathy is viewed as kind of a magic in itself.
yeah. Um, Mercedes Lackey, did she write? I think I'm confusing her with someone else. The Temeraire series. Is that what it's called? It's like Napoleonic France, but with dragons.
Oh, she might have.
It's Oh shoot. It'll come to me in a minute, but that's a lot of fun. I like um I like worlds that are kind of inspired by historical settings, so that I feel like I can connect with them in a way, um kind of grounded in reality, even if the reality is a little far-fetched. um that's a lot of fun to
Yeah,
me. The Outlander world, is a
that
lot of
one's good.
fun. Because it's a couple of centuries in the past, but um, she has a lot of actual historical events that kind of ground and root the series. Naomi Novik, thank you.
That's what it
You're
was.
absolutely right. I knew that didn't sound exactly right, but yeah, that series is a lot of fun. Um, Anything else that you can think of?
Um, when Brandon Sanderson, or yeah, when Sanderson decided to come up with the what ended up being the founding of hard magic versus soft magic,
Right.
that was genius.
Yes, yes, and
Um,
his Cosmere is shaping up to be one of the
yes.
most epic world building feats. Where he's got all these different series and they're loosely connected, but in his brain, there's a giant cosmos, and
Oh
he
yeah.
knows where everything falls, and he's starting to include little crossovers that don't make any difference to the story at all, except that if you've been reading them, you notice a character from this series pop up over here, and
Yep.
if you're paying attention, you're like, oh wow, that took a lot of thought. And I love stuff like that. I just geek out over it. But
Yep. I would
um
love to see his, however he keeps his
oh
notes.
oh yeah, that's got to be crazy. It's got to be crazy. um how do you think the difference between historical worlds and fantasy worlds is? And it's not displaying right. Let me read it again. How big do you think the difference between historical worlds and fantasy worlds is? How big do you think the difference is? Well,
I think
that's
it depends on the series, really. each individual book.
Yeah, I agree. And even if you talk about like Outlander, um, when the characters time travel back to originally Scotland, before the Battle of Culloden, and now they're in colonial America. We're talking about just a couple or 300 years in the past. In the grand scheme of things, it's not very much time at all. But you or I never got to visit there, so it's
Right.
it's fantastical in the sense that we've never gotten to see it. So it's just removed enough while still being accessible, I feel like. So yeah, I like things like that where I feel like there's a connection that I can put my finger on, even though it's nothing that I've ever gotten to experience. And that's one thing that I love about that Stephen Lawhead series. The Celtic otherworld is literally another dimension or planet or whatever you want to call it, and it's a reflection of like second or third century Britain, before the Romans, came to the British Isles. So it's vastly removed from anything I've ever experienced, but I still feel like it's kind of real, and I can, I can make a connection. So for me as a reader, I like to feel like that I can connect with it, even if it's a way big stretch for me to connect to it. I
Yeah,
like things that I feel like I can connect to. So, um,
understandable.
yeah, yeah. What about you? Do you like just completely fantastical worlds, or do you like things that have an air of familiarity?
It, I guess it all depends. If it's historical fiction or whatever else it may be, love. But I also, again, love this kind of stuff. I love fantasy. I love hard sci-fi. Oh, I'll read most anything, to be honest. I've got
Yeah.
Doctor Who books right over there that I read all the time, and some of those are pretty out of the out of the blue.
Yeah. Yeah. The next thing that after we've kind of nailed down all of these elements to the story, where's it going to take place, what time frame, how am I going to tell the story? Is it going to be first person, third person? Is it going to be present tense, past tense? Um, and we started looking at the plot grid last week, and we were really just kind of taking what we had figured out already and placing it on the grid to start getting an understanding of our story. The next thing I wanted to kind of look at today was a basic three act structure. So, how do we take what we know already and have figured out and start kind of coming up with a formal plan for that? So, I took the liberty to, um, and it's not showing on the screen. There it goes. To make a secondary plot grid with the three act structure, and so there are lots of variations on the three act structure. The Save the Cat is Save the Cat writes a novel, takes a three act structure, breaks it into 15 story beats, I believe it is.
I
I
think
think this
so.
one is 9 story beats, the one that I came up with. Um, but I thought we would just kind of start there so that you could start thinking about how the arc of your story is going to go. And if we start Act One, the setup, the first part of that is the exposition. This is where you introduce your protagonist within their normal everyday world. The reader learns who your character is, what they believe and value, what challenges they face in their current reality, and what they want. This is the opportunity to show your character in just a everyday what their normal is, and one thing that we say here at the end, in their current reality and what they want. Now, what your character wants may be different from what your character needs, and that will show itself as your story unfolds. Sometimes where your character begins and where they end have nothing to do with each other, and your character goes on a journey that they never expected, much less you, the reader. And so figure out how you're going to begin and to show your character as they start, and that's your exposition. And then the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the event that sets the whole story in motion. If you're familiar with the hero's journey, you know this moment as the call to adventure. This is Harry's letter to Hogwarts. It's Bilbo's visit from Gandalf. It's Nick inviting Rachel to the wedding in Singapore. The inciting incident presents your protagonist with the chance to chase down their goal or change their life. This is the catalyst that propels your character into action, though they might not act right away. This is the thing that invites them on an adventure. And sometimes it's not an invitation. Sometimes it's a car crash that changes, the way they look and act forever. It's up to you. Plot point one. Plot point one occurs when your protagonist makes the choice to embrace the opportunity presented by the inciting incident. These two events, the inciting incident and plot point one, might happen one right after the other. Sometimes the protagonist goes through a period of avoidance or deliberation before deciding to go all in. Either way, this story beat sends the protagonist and the story in an entirely new direction. And then we go into Act Two. So that's the first act is normal life and something that disrupts normal life. So then Act Two, the confrontation. The first beat of that is rising action. Your protagonist has now entered the world of the adventure, and they've got a lot of work to do to get to the midpoint. They have to become familiar with the world, make new friends, encounter new enemies, and face unfamiliar obstacles. This is also where you, as the author, expand on the central conflict and reveal new information about the primary antagonist. During the story beat, your protagonist is mostly reactive. This doesn't mean that they're passive. They still need to be making decisions and taking action, but for the most part, their choices are in response to the new challenges and new information. So your antagonist shows up here. Now, they could have shown up in the first act or the first scene, but this is where they really kind of make an impact as to who they are. Maybe you've already met this person, but maybe they haven't revealed really what they're up to, and this is where the conflict starts to arise. The midpoint, as you may have guessed, the story beat lands at the halfway point of your novel. Something huge happens here, and it's not good. This beat points your character in the direction of greater adventure. It probably also puts your protagonist's dilemma in a new light, like when Dorothy finds out the wizard won't help her unless she kills the Wicked Witch. That point in The Wizard of Oz ruined Dorothy's day. She thought she was getting an answer, and the wizard sends her on her way. It says she's got more work to do. The midpoint is a point of great conflict. And plot point two, now that your midpoint has changed everything, your protagonist prepares to face a new and unexpected adventure. Preparation could involve personal reflection, a period of denial, training, or pep talks from the mentor or friend they found along the way. Ultimately, your character establishes a new mission, and now that they know this world well, they shift from reactive to proactive. This is a growth point for your character to stop reacting to the world and start playing a role in solving the problem. And then we've got Act 3, the resolution. If you've been tracking the math, you already know Act 3 takes up about 25% of your story. So, Act 1 is usually about 25%. Act 2 can be about 50%. That's where the majority of your story takes place, and then the resolution is about another quarter. Doesn't have to be exactly like that, but that's the way a lot of stories um, play out. The pre-climax, also known as the dark night of the soul. The pre-climax is the beat where all seems to be lost. The protagonist has marched boldly toward their new challenge, and they appear to be losing hard. We now see the full power of the antagonist, and the protagonist faces their deepest fear and most profound weaknesses. Your reader might still assume the hero will prevail, but right now it's really hard to imagine how they'll get out of this. This is everything that you've been writing up toward. Your protagonist is defeated, but we know something good's going to come out of it. And then the climax. While many of these story beats happen over the course of a few scenes, the climax is typically a single scene, ideally a thrilling one. In this beat, your hero rises from the ashes and prevails. They achieve victory by combining their natural strengths with the lessons they've learned over the course of their adventure. And then the denouement, time to release the tension and tie up all those loose ends. This means wrapping up the character arc by showing what the character has won, what they do with it, and how they've changed. They place to resolve subplots, establish how the protagonist has transformed, clarify or restart the theme, and the end, the thing we've been writing toward the whole time. So this is all stories don't follow this plan exactly, but if you're like me and a struggling plotter, shall we say, just kind of understanding the rises and falls of story is a big help to me, to just make sure that even though I'm not planning out every detail of my character's journey, am I hitting the right high points in the story? I like to think of it in terms of like a road trip. You can go from Los Angeles to New York, and there are many routes that you can take. You can go along the south and go through Arizona and Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama, and then turn up and go up the East Coast to New York. Or you could go across the middle of the country and go through the Midwest, and
Don't go right now, it's snowing.
well, yeah, don't. Or you could go up the West Coast to the northern tip and drive across the north. There's lots of places, but if you identify some major points along the way, then you can vary and see where the story goes. So that's kind of how I approach the 3-act structure. Some examples of the 3-act structure in Act 1. If we talk about the exposition beat in the Hunger Games, this is where Katniss is hunting, where they explain the world and the relationships, and the inciting incident, the reaping, where Prim is selected. And then plot point 1, Katniss volunteers as tribute. So we can kind of see how the plot advances through that. And then in Act 2, the confrontation, the rising action, Katniss trains and the games begin. It's wild. And then the midpoint, Rue is killed. Katniss vows to win. Plot point 2, Katniss teams up with Peeta. And then the confrontation, we've got the pre-climax where Peeta is injured and Katniss fights for both of them. And then the climax where the fight with Cato and mutations with the poison berries, and the denouement, Katniss and Peeta win. Katniss sparks a rebellion. So you can that's a story we're mostly all familiar with, and you can kind of see how it follows those beats. So next week we're going to look at drafting, at what the actual writing, and how to take some of these story notes that we've made and start putting it into action. And we'll look at the different editing tools that we have at our disposal, and what that looks like. Sam, do you have anything that you want to add before we wrap up for this week?
Um, on your note about not all stories follow that particular. I don't always have an antagonist, so I have to
Yeah.
kind of figure out how to fit the story structure into the books where I don't have an antagonist or a main antagonist identified.
Right. Well, and sometimes an antagonist is your protagonist. Maybe they're wrestling with something, um, maybe it's an internal antagonist. And that is, something you have to identify, and it's fun to play with. I guess identifying what your character wants and needs, and what's keeping them from that. And sometimes it's our own self, and that's a fun thing to play with.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are things to think about before next week, and also be thinking about NaNoWriMo. That's why we're doing this. Is NaNoWriMo is coming up in November. We're just under 2 weeks away. One thing that is important for a big challenge like this is community. And at storycraft.cafe, we've got a wonderful community there, of people that are ready to talk about problems that are coming up, and to work through solutions. We've got a great team of story baristas over there with Keo and Sam are constantly running challenges and writing sprints. And Sam, what do you guys have going on in the upcoming time that folks could get involved with?
This month we have sprints. We have Saturday sprint marathons. I do the hour-long sprints for people who want to do the full hour just writing, but I also have the half-hour sprints for people who don't want to do the full hour of writing. That can be a bit much. Keo's got the weekly motivators. What's motivating you this week? How did you do with your goal? How did you accomplish that? Is there anything you're struggling with? She'll do the weekly nano prep, which is what we're doing Wednesdays, I believe. She'll do how do you describe your character? What's your setting? What's your world look like? How are you managing, your own mental health as the writer?
Yeah,
Because that's pretty important.
that's pretty important. I think you're right. One thing, the writing sprints, there are group writing sprints at Storycraft Cafe where you absolutely can get involved, and it's fun to write along with other folks. But in the Dabble software, it's not displaying. I don't know what's going on with our streaming software
It's
today.
showing it for me.
It is it okay? It's not showing on my end. Oh, there we go. In the right hand sidebar, you'll see the timer right here, and you can choose 15 minutes up to an hour, or 5 minutes up to an hour. And when you click that, it starts a little timer, a little countdown, and then shows this is your personal sprint timer. So that's a handy little tool there. To you say, well, I'm going to write for 30 minutes, and that kind of shows you what you're up against, how much you have left, and kind of keeps you accountable. So that's a fun feature that was included in our latest Dabble update. And let me remove that there. So that's a handy little tool there for doing writing sprints. Sam, thank you for joining me once again, and everybody, let's go get ready for NaNoWriMo.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.